And that's a scrap that I'm willing to have with the federal government. This is their work, and they have failed to do this. We've been asking for them to do this since the 1930s.
It's a win for Montana. It's a win for America.
This deal goes through. The Keystone XL pipeline, yes, that pipeline Biden canceled back in 2021, is back on the table. After years of Ottawa blocking Alberta's energy, the United States may be stepping in to finish the job.
The United States has just moved forward with a major pipeline opportunity tied directly to Alberta oil, while Canada is still stuck in its usual cycle of promises, delays, consultations, and political theater. The project is the Bridger Pipeline, a transborder route that could move around 550,000 barrels of crude every day through Montana and toward Wyoming. Ottawa keeps talking. The U.S. has already signed the permit.
The Bridger project is a massive oil pipeline project that will come in from Canada into Montana and Phillips County, go through 9 counties in Montana before getting to Wyoming.
That is why this story is such a humiliation for Canada. Alberta has spent years asking its own country for better market access, real export infrastructure, and a serious plan for its energy sector. Instead, Albertans were handed more restrictions and more speeches. Then the U.S. looked at the same oil, saw jobs and energy security, and decided it was worth supporting.
In Confederation in Canada, know that a pipeline is nothing but a little crumb. And this is what Mark Carney had to say about it. Let's have a listen.
We're also clear that today's Canada-BC agreement will maintain the federal North Coast tanker ban.
The proposed Bridger pipeline would stretch roughly 645 to 647 miles and cross 9 counties in Montana before continuing toward Wyoming. It would largely follow existing pipeline corridors, which helps reduce new land disturbance. The proposal also includes advanced monitoring systems, leak detection, and directional drilling beneath rivers and wetlands. This is not some vague political promise. It is a defined infrastructure proposal with companies, a route, and capacity.
The BLM and the Montana DEQ are reviewing the project, and it could cut across private, state, and federal land.
It's a win for Montana. It's a win for America.
Mark Morris and the Yellowstone County Commissioners are among the many Montana leaders supporting the project.
The project is being advanced by Canadian company Southbow and U.S.-based Bridger Pipeline. That detail alone should embarrass Ottawa. A Canadian company connected to Alberta Oil is finding more practical support south of the border than it has received from the federal government at home. Canada talks endlessly about protecting its economy, yet one of its biggest industries keeps getting treated like something shameful.
Just this week, they drafted a letter to the Bureau of Land Management expressing that support.
The energy security is, again, it's going to be on the North American continent. And transporting oil via a pipeline is safer than rail or truck.
Montana officials have welcomed the project because they understand what it means for local communities. Construction jobs, supply contracts, equipment orders, hotel bookings, restaurant traffic, tax revenue, and long-term infrastructure all come with a project of this scale. Yellowstone County leaders have already talked about becoming a hub for labor, materials, and services. American communities see economic opportunity. Ottawa sees another reason to delay.
Commissioners also say the pipeline would be an economic boost for Yellowstone County, bringing construction jobs, supply contracts, and local spending.
Will be a hub for their construction activities, for supplying parts and pieces, labor.
Supporters also argue that moving oil through a modern pipeline is safer and more efficient than transporting the same volume by rail or truck. That should be common sense. Moving 550,000 barrels every day by road or rail would mean more vehicles, more handling, more fuel use, and more chances for accidents. But Canada stopped treating energy policy as a practical issue years ago.
I just see it, energy independence for America.
In Billings, David J., MTN News.
I've seen proposals for as much as 2.5 million barrels a day that would come from Canada, go to the United States, and most of that permitting would be under the authority of the Energy Dominance Council.
The Bridger project is often described as a partial revival of the old Keystone XL idea. It is not the full original project returning exactly as it was. However, The political meaning is obvious. Keystone XL was meant to move Alberta crude deeper into the U.S. energy system. It was proposed, rejected, revived, and then cancelled again in 2021. Now, the same basic opportunity is returning through a different project.
But I think what it comes down to is we need reliable, affordable energy for people. Because when people are hurting, that's when they put pressure on their politicians. And even the most left-wing ideological politician will realize, boy, I gotta moderate this and come back to center. And that's what we're seeing in Canada.
For years, Canadian politicians acted as if cancelling pipelines would somehow cancel global oil demand. It did not. The world kept using oil. American companies kept building infrastructure. Other countries kept producing and exporting. Buyers kept buying. The only thing Canada successfully reduced was its own ability to profit from one of the most valuable resources it already had. The US is now looking at Alberta oil and seeing stable supply, refinery access, jobs, and energy security. Canada keeps looking at Alberta oil and seeing a political problem. That is the difference. One government is trying to connect the resource to customers. The other government is trying to look supportive while preserving every rule that makes construction nearly impossible.
Okay, you just heard that. 2.5 million barrels a day. That's a massive amount of oil. I mean, seriously, think about that for a second. That is a game-changing amount of energy being moved from Alberta straight into the United States.
The Bridger project still has regulatory steps to complete. The Bureau of Land Management and Montana Department of Environmental Quality are involved in the review process. A formal application and environmental review are still important parts of the process. Construction could reportedly begin as early as 2027 if the remaining approvals are secured. So no, the pipeline is not already built.
Years after Keystone XL was canceled in 2021 over environmental and Indigenous concerns, Bridger Pipeline Expansion LLC has submitted a project proposal to the Montana Department of Environmental Quality for a 645-mile pipeline.
But compare that with what Canada is offering. The U.S. has a signed permit, a defined route, participating companies, local political support, a proposed capacity, and a possible construction timeline. Canada has another announcement about a possible West Coast pipeline, even though there is no final route, no confirmed builder, no financing plan, and no agreement from British Columbia.
What exactly is Alberta still relying on Ottawa for at that point? Because this isn't just a small side project. This is Alberta plugging directly into the largest energy market on the planet, more than ever before.
Mark Carney has discussed a possible pipeline carrying at least 1 million barrels per day of lower emission Alberta crude toward Asian markets. On paper, that sounds important. Alberta desperately needs access to more than one major buyer. A route toward Asia could improve competition, strengthen pricing, and reduce dependence on the US market. Then, Ottawa added the usual list of conditions. The project would depend on the Pathways Carbon Capture Initiative moving ahead. British Columbia would need substantial economic benefits. Indigenous consultation obligations would need to be fully respected. Indigenous ownership and partnerships would also need to be addressed. Those are serious issues, but Ottawa has a habit of turning reasonable considerations into an endless process that never produces a final decision.
According to the project overview submitted to Montana DEQ, the Bridger expansion pipeline would transport about 550,000 barrels of crude per day, smaller than Keystone XL, and largely follow existing pipeline corridors to minimize new land disturbance.
Consultation matters. Environmental standards matter. Communities affected by major infrastructure should benefit. The problem is not that these subjects exist. The problem is that Ottawa uses them as cover for inaction. Every Canadian pipeline begins with a big promise and ends with another study, another disagreement, another legal question, and another government official explaining why nothing can happen yet. Then there is the North Coast tanker ban, which makes Ottawa's entire pipeline story look ridiculous. The federal government has said the ban will remain in place. Alberta wants access to northern British Columbia ports such as Kitimat or Prince Rupert because they offer a more direct route toward Japan, South Korea, and other Asian markets. Yet the rule blocking major tanker access remains.
Well, the Alberta government says its pipeline plans are unchanged after the Liberals strengthened their federal majority government with a sweep in those by-elections on Monday.
Canada is effectively promising Alberta a pipeline toward the Pacific while preserving the restriction that prevents the oil from being properly shipped from the northern coast. That is not an energy strategy. It is political theater. It is like promising someone a railway and then announcing that trains will remain prohibited. Albertans are expected to celebrate the promise and ignore the rule that destroys its value. The contradiction becomes even more absurd when Alaska is considered. American tankers already move oil through nearby Pacific routes along the British Columbia coast. Ships travel from Alaska toward ports in Washington and farther south. The waters remain usable when American oil passes through, but Alberta crude is treated as if it creates a completely different environmental danger.
If approved, construction could begin as early as 2027. Supporters say the pipeline could increase Canadian crude exports to the U.S., create construction jobs, and expand energy infrastructure, while opponents continue to raise concerns about potential environmental and community risks.
Apparently, the ocean only becomes sensitive when Alberta is the one making money. Canada has built a system where foreign oil can move through nearby waters, while Canadian producers are denied proper access to global markets. Then federal politicians act confused when Albertans conclude the rules are designed against them rather than designed to protect the country.
It gives Alberta more independence from the rest of Canada, particularly considering situations like what we have right now, where Alberta wants to build a pipeline to the West Coast through BC, and BC is making it nearly impossible.
British Columbia Premier David Eby has made Ottawa's announcement look even weaker. He has said there is no actual northern pipeline project, no confirmed route, no proponent, and no financing. He has also suggested such a pipeline could cost between $40 billion and $50 billion. So Ottawa is selling Albertans a national project that the province it must cross says does not even exist.
The reason why a pipeline to the north is important, in my opinion, is twofold. Number one, if it's allowed, if it's approved and they remove the tanker ban or they give Alberta an exemption, it indicates a willingness to negotiate in good faith with Alberta, a willingness to accommodate Alberta and recognize the contributions that this province continues to give to this country, though undeserved.
This is Canadian federalism at its worst. One government makes an announcement, another government says the project is unrealistic. A third group demands more consultation. Then Alberta is told to wait patiently and be grateful that the subject is being discussed. After decades of delay, discussion is not progress. Alberta needs a route, financing, approvals, construction, and a buyer at the other end. Ottawa created the hostile investment environment and now points to the lack of investors as proof that the project is unrealistic. That is like chasing every customer out of a restaurant and then claiming nobody likes the food. Businesses need certainty. They need to know what the rules are, how long approval takes, and whether a government will respect the decision once permission is granted.
Tells us one political scientist thinks Premier Danielle Smith will have to walk a delicate line as she navigates pipeline talks with Ottawa and deals with the separatist movement.
So the pipeline being built to the south towards the United States, in my opinion, is great news. It gives Alberta more independence from the rest of Canada, particularly considering situations like what we have right now.
Trans Mountain remains the clearest example. The project was originally expected to cost far less under private ownership. Political and regulatory uncertainty eventually drove the original private owner away. The federal government stepped in, purchased the project, and then watched the cost rise beyond $35 billion. Ottawa later presented itself as the hero that saved the pipeline. No, Ottawa rescued the pipeline from a disaster Ottawa helped create. Canada turned a commercially proposed project into a giant taxpayer burden, then used that experience to warn everyone how expensive pipelines can be. Only the federal government could start the fire, pay billions to control it, and then blame the building for burning.
So this right here reminds Alberta that it might just be better to negotiate directly with the Americans than to continue to try with Canada.
Now, the same people expect Albertans to trust them with another massive pipeline promise. When Albertans remain skeptical, they are called divisive. When they demand better market access, they are called greedy. When they question whether Confederation is working for them, they are labeled anti-national. Canada blocks Alberta's opportunities and then lectures Alberta about loyalty. That is the insult at the center of this story. Albertans have spent decades asking for pipelines, export access, predictable regulation, and recognition of what their province contributes. Alberta's energy sector supports jobs, exports, tax revenue, investment, and public services across the country. Yet the province is repeatedly treated as if its main industry is a national embarrassment. The U.S. is responding in the opposite way. American officials see Alberta's oil as a strategic asset. Montana communities want the jobs. Pipeline companies want the business. Local governments want the investment. Washington signed the permit. No one south of the border is demanding that Alberta apologize for producing energy before it can participate in the economy.
Montana DEQ says it has not received a formal application. However, Bridger has notified the agency it intends to submit in the coming weeks. A spokesperson told MTN, while the application review is occurring, DEQ and partner agencies will conduct a thorough environmental review of the proposal.
The U.S. wants the oil, the contracts, the infrastructure, and the security that come with stable supply. Canada wants Albertans to feel guilty for producing the same resource that helps fund the country. Then Canadians act shocked when some Albertans say they feel more respected by the country south of the border than by Ottawa. That does not automatically make them anti-Canadian. It means Ottawa has failed to act like a serious partner. National loyalty cannot be demanded while economic opportunity is constantly denied. If Canada wants Alberta to feel included, Canada must treat the province as more than a source of revenue and political criticism. Loyalty has to work in both directions.
You've got countries in Europe actively trying to move away from the Middle East when it comes to energy. You've got demand going through the roof. And you got the United States stepping in and saying, we can supply it. They're ramping up exports. They're fast-tracking permits. What used to take years is now being pushed through in months, even weeks sometimes.
Danielle Smith now faces a difficult political reality. She continues negotiating with Ottawa, while many Albertans no longer believe federal promises. Every delay strengthens the argument that Canada will never treat Alberta fairly. Every American approval gives frustrated Albertans another example of a government that sees their energy industry as valuable rather than offensive. They can now ask a simple question: why does the U.S. appear more willing to support Alberta's economic future than Alberta's own country? Carney cannot answer that with another speech about cooperation. He cannot dismiss the issue as if pipelines are a minor detail. This is about jobs, investment, revenue, market access, and whether Alberta has a serious future inside the current system.
Different routes, hundreds of thousands, even millions of barrels per day being planned out. At a certain point, you stop looking at this like a single deal and you start realizing this is an entire network being built.
The Bridger permit makes Ottawa's excuses look weak. The U.S. has shown that energy infrastructure can still be treated as a national asset. Canada treats it like a moral crisis. The U.S. talks about construction and supply. Canada talks about conditions and another review. One side is moving through a process. The other side is still explaining why movement is difficult. Right now, the United States is treating Alberta oil like a valuable strategic resource. Canada is treating it like something that must apologize for existing. The U.S. signed the permit and created a path forward. Ottawa is still explaining why Alberta should wait, trust the process, and be grateful for another promise.